ever, welcome back. It's with gratitude to the Master of the Universe and to each and every one of you that we continue to study the Proverbs of Shlomo HaMelech from here in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, the old city of Jerusalem. We're using the commentary of Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap, Zechus Yagin Aleinu, in the Sefer Mishlei, specifically his commentary to Sefer Mishlei, and we're up to Pasuk Daled. As I've mentioned a number of times, the first few psukim of Sefer Mishlei each constitute an individual hakdama, a sort of introduction to what Shlomo HaMelech hopes we'll be able to derive and take out from these proverbs, from these parables that make up the rest of Sefer Mishlei. And Pasuk Daled is still very much in the realm of the introduction. Pasuk says, Laseis lipsayim arama linar das umezima. The purpose, the tachlis of Sefer Mishlei is with the hopes of endowing psayim, simple people, with arama. Arama literally means craftiness, but has a sort of connotation of warfare strategy or a tactic. It's an attempt to grant us mashalim, these parables, which can help us to navigate the twists and turns of life, which can be compared to a battlefield. Lina'ar das umezima, and for the sake of granting young people, the youth, das, knowledge, umezima. Mezima means foresight, something which a person is able to understand before their proper time, before properly maturing into the idea. Let's try to understand what this means. You know, the word mashal itself, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes in Sefer Bereshis in Parak Daled, Pasuk Zayin, if I'm not mistaken. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes that the word mashal itself comes from the word moshel. It's part of the same shoresh. To be a moshel means to rule over something. And in many ways, the idea of a mashal is an attempt to allow somebody to rule over something which is really not within their jurisdiction. A mashal serves to help a person who is not yet quite ready to understand a very lofty idea, and by couching it within the realm of parable, within the realm of story, to allow somebody access to some area which is really beyond their intellectual capacity. In a sense, the Torah itself, which is called the Mashal HaKadmoni, is called the ancient parable, the ancient mashal, follows the same kind of path. We know from the Haggadah Shel Pesach, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, the Torah speaks to 4 different types of sons. It speaks to the Chacham and the Rasha, the Tam and the She'en Elidei Lishol. The person who is intelligent and wise, the person who's evil, the person who's simple, and the person who doesn't even really know how to ask. Because the Torah, in lacing itself in all the stories and the narratives that make up the Torah, Sefer Bereshis begins with all these different stories, and can't even go in the parts of the Torah that are more legalistic without going every few chapters into a narrative, into a story. The same thing is true of the Talmud. Shas begins with the laws of Kriya Shema, but if you look at the first few Mishnayos that make up the Talmud Bavli's introductory Mishnayos, we have a story about a bunch of sons coming back from a wedding and trying to figure out what's the din in terms of saying Shema very late at night. We have a story about a Rav who's traveling on the road and decides to lie down and gets hijacked by some robbers and he gets attacked. The stories which find themselves within the narrative of the law is an attempt to bring down, to help us to be moshel, for us to be able to be sholet, to rule over things which maybe are beyond our simple understanding. So Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap says, Mishalei Shlomo yitnu gam lepsayim arama. The parables of Shlomo HaMelech endow even the simplest people with craftiness, with an ability to press forward in life. Lo kamo etzam hanimshal, not like the corollary to the mashal, that which the mashal is attempting to convey, mibiladei hamashal, without the aid of the mashal, sheniten rak lechakimin, because that is only given over to people who are wise bifnei atzman, people who are able to look deep within their own well springs of their intellect and be able to understand davar mitoch davar, so that they don't need these mashalim, these parables, these sipurim, these stories, in order to help them to understand what it is that the Torah is trying to convey. As the pasuk says in Daniel, Yahiv chachma lechakimin, that chachma should be given over to those who are already wise in and of themselves. But the role of a parable, the role of a mashal, the role of a proverb, the role of a story, is in order to allow somebody access into a realm which is beyond their capacity, beyond their intellect. Through these remarkable stories, these remarkable parables, even somebody who is before the full endowment of their intellect, someone who has not fully developed their mind, is able to access and understand what it is that the Torah is asking from them. That they should be able to become intelligent and wise through and via these mashalim, these stories. You know, the stories of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, for example, the parables of the Dubner Magid, the mashalim of the Chafetz Chaim. Each of these are attempting to convey a certain thing which, you know, just the other day I was walking with my daughter, we were on our way, we were walking to a friend's house on Shabbos, and my daughter asked me, Abba, could you tell me one of the stories of the Sipur Tzadikim? Could you tell me one of the stories of the righteous? And what my daughter was really asking for is she was trying to grasp onto some nugget of wisdom, some new way of looking, a new perspective of looking at the world, but understood that perhaps if I would attempt to portray some philosophical idea without the couching, without the covering of the mashal, she would have been lost in the matter. It comes to mind the idea, in the Pesach Eliyahu. The Pesach Eliyahu is a Kabbalistic tefillah which is recited before tefillah, especially for those who daven using the spheros. The word sphira, the spheros of the Kabbalah, which are sometimes laced into the davening. So the Pesach Eliyahu refers to these spheros as tikkunim, as fixings. Why are the spheros called tikkunim? Why are they called fixings? Because on the one hand, a sphera means to allow light to shine, from the word sapir, to allow something to emanate light and to be able to illuminate something which we're not able to understand. At the same time, the spheros obscure the blinding, infinite light of Hashem. And so they are a takana, they're tikkunim in the sense that they at the same time allow that light to come through, but simultaneously are able to block just enough light to couch it in story. The word sipur itself comes from the same word, sphira, sipur, because a story allows us to convey an idea which, without the aid of that sipur, without the aid of that mashal, we wouldn't be able to access this wisdom. V'heim yigadlu below ace. A person who takes access of these mishalim, who takes the aid of these mishalim, is able to grow before their proper time. A child is able to access wisdom which is way beyond their intellect. A precocious young child who wishes and aspires to understand some aspect of das umezima, some foresight, something that in the future they'll say, that's what that story meant, that's what that Maimer Chazal meant, is able to access those things through these mishalim of Shlomo Melech. V'amru arama. Shlomo Melech refers to these mishalim specifically as arama. Arama, as I said before, means warfare. And the implication of arama is, Hainu lischakim neged mi shemarim alav, that if a person is involved in warfare, that means that there's someone who's out there lurking in the shadows, who's attempting to stop me from being able to self-actualize. This is the Yetzer Hara himself, the evil inclination himself, those negative impulses, those self-destructive impulses which are attempting to hold a person back, to lull them into a sense of complacency so that they are not able to arrive at these lofty understandings. These Mishalim of Shlomo allow us to vanquish and to fight against this Yetzer Hara which is lurking in the shadows of the human personality. Umi she'enu chacham nofel bereshto. Someone who's not wise, someone who doesn't know how to properly engage in this warfare against the Yetzer Hara, will most easily fall into the net, will fall under the spell of the Yetzer Hara. V'ulam al yidei hamashalim. But through these parables of Shlomo HaMelech, through the parables of the Torah, and through the parables of the Chachamim, and through the parables of Shlomo HaMelech, yinatein arama gam lipsayim, even the most simple person can attain some sort of strategy for fighting in this war. Sheyedu liskomem neged kol arama. They can learn the tactic, the strategy for being able to go against this person who's lurking in the shadows. Of course, the Nachash HaKadmoni is called Arum Mikol Chayas Asada. He was the most Arum, the most crafty of all the creatures. And Laseis Lipsayim Arama, in order to endow those simple ones with Arama to fight back against that Nachash which is crawling around out there. V'gam Hanar Yachkim Be'etza Negdo. And even a child, even a young person, even the youth, before their time are able to then fight against the Yetzer Hara, even though they don't have the proper parables. Rav Klonimus Kalman Shapira, the Piazetzner Rebbe, explained that these nimshalim that we're waiting to arrive at, a parable allows us to, once in a while, be able to sneak in a path to be able to fight against the Yetzer Hara. He says that every teacher must, at some point in every single day, in every lesson that they give, sneak in some sort of mashal l'maha davar doma. What is it that we're trying to say to you? How many times we're giving classes, or we're learning from people, and we're learning from Svarim, and it's trying to convey some deep idea, but the parable which is going to bring this down into my life, to tell me how I'm supposed to actually use this in my day-to-day life, is missing. Every one of us is a nar in a certain sense. Every one of us is a youth in the sense that we don't yet know how to use those nimshalim to access what it is that Hashem is asking from us. Lo rak shelo yinatzcho hayetzer. But if a person allows themselves access into these mishalim, into this arama v'gam nar yachkim be'etza negdo, and even a child learns how to fight against those negative impulses, it's not enough that they will not be defeated by the Yetzer Hara. Elagam le'schakim be'etza lihipater mimenu legamre. But they'll even be able to take some sort of advice, how to remove themselves from the clutches of the Yetzer Hara once and for all. Linar das mizima, to teach youth knowledge and foresight. May Hashem help us that next time we'll be able to come back and continue into the next pasuk in Sefer Mishlei.